Human beings have been killing each other since they learned to pick up rocks, but H.H. Holmes has the dubious honor of being called America's first serial killer. No one is sure how many people met their end at Holmes' hands, but what is known about him is terrifying. H.H. Holmes. You've probably heard the name, but it was just one of many aliases. His name was actually Herman Webster Mudgett, and he was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire in 1861. It wasn't until 1885 that he moved to Chicago, adopted the alias of H.H. Holmes, and began construction on his infamous murder castle. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Most of his childhood history that we know about comes from his own accounts. While his writings can't entirely be trusted, some of the incidents of his youth that he recalls seem telling. He wrote of one day in particular that he said shaped his dark fascination with the inner workings of the human body. Growing up, he wrote he had a fear of the town doctor's office. Every time he walked by the open door, his stomach would turn at the smell of the place wafting out at him, which is exactly the sort of weakness that neighborhood bullies tend to notice. At some point, the boys forced him to put his hands on one of the skeletons in the doctor's office. It's been speculated that this moment sparked a morbid curiosity in the young Mudgett and ultimately led to his later enrollment in medical school. There's no way to tell just how many people H.H. Holmes killed. Estimates range from 20 to 200. He confessed to 27 murders, but told his lawyer he had killed 133 people. Chicago police reportedly found the remains of at least 100 individuals in his murder castle alone. According to researchers, his taste for killing started when he was young. Holmes would reportedly flee his abusive household for the nearby forests, where he passed the time by dissecting animals. They also suspected he may have killed his first human when he was 11. At the very least, he witnessed the death. He had befriended a slightly older boy named Tom. According to Holmes, they had been exploring an abandoned house when Tom took a fall and was killed. Some believe Holmes pushed him. Long before the murder castle, Holmes started his dark ways with insurance fraud. While he was a student at the University of Michigan, he would steal bodies from the medical school, mutilate them to make them appear as though they died in an accident, and then collect insurance claims on policies that he himself had opened. His tuition was paid with money he swindled from a wealthy woman, and Holmes wooed and married multiple women, sometimes at the same time. Then he convinced them to make him the beneficiary of their fortunes before leaving them. He also masterminded some bizarre scams, like selling a cure for alcoholism and hawking a machine he claimed could turn water into gas. Really, it was a washing machine he'd hooked up to a gas main, but he was such a charismatic liar that his schemes tended to work. He did make one attempt at running a legitimate business. The ABC Copier Company made high-quality copies of various documents, and that was legal enough. When the business failed, he moved to 63rd and Wallace Streets to the building that would become the Murder Castle. Strangely, Holmes even ran one of his scams out of that so-called Murder Castle. There was a pharmacy on the first floor from which he sold mineral water by the glass, which he claimed had miraculous healing properties. H.H. Holmes' life wasn't just dark and depraved, it was massively confusing. Trying to sift through the details is like trying to untie the tail of a rat king, but there are confirmed bits and pieces. Holmes formed a relationship with a woman named Julia Connor in 1890 and moved her and her 8-year-old daughter into the murder castle. Then he went to Texas, where he met Minnie Williams. Williams was a wealthy young woman who fell in love with the man she knew as Harry Gordon. She moved to Chicago with Harry in 1893 and quickly grew jealous of Connor, who later disappeared. The remains of a young child were later found in the basement, thought to be those of Connor's daughter. Williams became the mistress of Murder Castle, and while no one knows whether she was more victim or accomplice, her sister was invited to join them in Chicago and then promptly disappeared. Holmes later claimed Williams had killed her sister in a jealous rage. While it's hard to take his word for it, she seemed to do almost anything for him, including being a witness to one of his many marriages, despite also being his mistress. The Murder Castle was every bit as insane as you could imagine a place like that would be. Holmes built it during the chaos preceding the 1893 World's Fair, and as Chicago prepared to welcome millions of people, Holmes prepared to welcome his own visitors too. It started in 1887 when he took over the pharmacy he'd been working at after the owner mysteriously disappeared. Construction finished in 1892 and covered a whole city block. Holmes rented out areas to merchants and rooms on the upper floors to unsuspecting travelers who found themselves in a nightmarish funhouse with few ways to escape. Holmes had an office on the 3rd floor, along with a bank vault and a series of rooms, angled hallways, dead ends, and stairs to nowhere. The 2nd floor had 51 doors leading from 6 hallways to 35 normal rooms and plenty of not-so-normal rooms. Some were airtight, some were soundproofed, and some of the doors led to closet-sized rooms fitted with gas pipes. There were trapdoors, sliding panels, and yes, there really were secret chutes that would open and send guests to the basement. The idea of stepping into Holmes's dark, brick-walled basement is terrifying, and it's impossible to imagine the horrors law enforcement were confronted with when they finally stepped inside. The centerpiece of the basement torture chamber was something the police described as a medieval rack. Holmes gave it the much more catchy name of elasticity determinator, and he used it to try to prove the human body could be stretched almost infinitely. Spoiler alert, the human body actually cannot be stretched infinitely. Holmes never completely explained his oddball medical theories or how the machines were supposed to work, but he apparently believed he could eventually create an entirely new race of people with his peculiar brand of experimentation. To those ends, he stretched some of his victims in the hopes of kickstarting a race of giants. For others, he just tortured them to get the details of how to access their fortunes. The basement was also kitted out with several pits filled with quicklime and acids, a crematory, operating tables, and cabinets filled with surgical instruments. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it was very, very real.
I am, sir, very respectfully yours, H.W. Mudgett, M.D., alias H.H. Holmes.
Holmes didn't dispose of all of his victims' bodies in the quicklime pits or crematory. For some, he had the help of a man named Charles Chappell, a so-called skeleton articulator whose job was more disgusting than it sounds. Chappell was in charge of stripping what was left of the flesh off the bones, then reassembling them into a skeleton that could be sold to a medical school or just kept. For what purpose? Well, some things are probably best left to the imagination. It's unclear what happened to Chappell, but at least one of the skeletons he stripped and prepared belonged to one of Holmes's many assistants, Emmeline Seagrun. When she disappeared, Holmes claimed she had run off with a stranger, but later investigators linked her to the skeleton Holmes had sold to a nearby school. Say what you will about Holmes, but there's no arguing the fact that he was diabolical, charming, and incredibly good at convincing anyone to believe anything. He got away with murder for years, and it wasn't until he made a few crucial mistakes that things started to unravel for him. The first was that he killed his partner in 1894, a man named Benjamin Pitezel. He met Pitezel about the same time he met Minnie Williams, and he definitely recruited Pitezel into his schemes. The plan was pretty simple. They would fake Pitezel's death, then collect and split the insurance money. Instead, Holmes got him drunk, set Pitezel on fire, collected the cash, and left town with 3 of his children. When the claim was investigated as fraud, law enforcement caught up to Holmes in Boston and sent him back to Philadelphia, where he killed Pitezel. Philadelphia assigned one of its best officials, Frank Geyer, to look for the missing kids. When he tugged on that single string, the whole elaborate tapestry started to unravel, beginning with the discovery of 2 Pitezel daughters, ages 11 and 15, decomposing beneath a Toronto house Holmes had briefly rented. After getting a tip from Holmes's former cellmate, Marion Hedgepeth, the Pinkerton National Detective Agency led the charge to arrest him in Boston. Holmes showed no sympathy when Benjamin Pitezel's wife testified against him at his trial. He largely mounted his own defense in the proceedings. To give you an idea of how well that went, he was given the death penalty on November 2, 1895, less than a week after the trial started. Holmes appealed his conviction several times, and when it became clear that he wasn't going to dodge the death penalty, he sold his confession to a newspaper for $7,500. He confessed to 27 murders, and then the day after it was published, he recanted his confession and denied any of it was true. He was hanged on May 7, 1896, and as he stood on the scaffold, he gave his last words, saying in part, "I only wish to say that the extent of my wrongdoing in the taking of human life consists in contriving the killing of 2 women that have died at my hands as a result of criminal operations."
Well, bye.
Afterward, his final wishes were granted. He would be entombed in cement and buried 10 feet underground. If the murder castle was still standing, there's no doubt it would have been turned into a tourist attraction. It almost was. The building was bought only a few weeks after the police finished combing it from top to bottom. Someone named A.M. Clark planned to open it to the public, but the building caught fire under mysterious circumstances. Explosions were heard only moments after a nearby night watchman saw the fire. An hour and a half later, most of the building had collapsed. A post office stands on the site today. Is it haunted? Probably. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about the world's most notorious criminals are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.